What's in this thing?
Today I am revisiting my Zotac GTX 295 to do some gaming tests. I decided that instead of using one of my test rigs, I'd build a new system with parts more suited for the time period. The CPU I chose is an Intel Core 2 Quad Q6600 from 2007. This is a 4-core, 4-thread processor clocked at 2.4 GHz. The motherboard is an Asus Maximus Formula from around 2007. This is a socket LGA775 motherboard that targeted the enthusiast PC market with a focus on overclocking and performance. For RAM, we have a 4GB kit of OCZ Reaper memory. This is 4 individual sticks, each 1GB of DDR2 clocked at 1066 MHz. The storage is a pair of 74GB Western Digital Raptor 10,000 RPM hard drives. Released in 2007, they were the first consumer 10,000 RPM hard drives, and they are going to be running in a RAID 0 configuration. First, let's have a look at the motherboard. Taking it out of the box, we get the board, an audio card, and the accessory box. As far as I can tell, this motherboard is complete with pretty much all of its original accessories, and what a selection there is. From IDE cables to PCI, USB, and FireWire cards, and additional chipset cooling. This motherboard has it all. Now the motherboard is unboxed, let's get it kitted out. First the CPU, lock it down with the retention arm. Now I'm going to add the cooler with the fan off at first so it's easy to get to the mounting pegs. Next is the RAM. Each of the sticks has a nice click. Now the RAM is seated, let's get the CPU fan on. Oh, it doesn't fit. I'll flip the cooler around. Now the cooler is the opposite way, it'll fit. Let's get the motherboard onto the test bench and finish it off. I'll get the audio card in, followed by the power supply and the 24-pin connector. Next, the graphics card, and I'll connect the power cables, and then the LCD poster. Last but not least, the hard drives, and then we can power it up. On first boot, all the lights are on and the fans are spinning, looking good. Let's check in BIOS to see if everything was detected correctly. And as you look at that, our CPU and RAM are there. I created a RAID 0 of the 2 Raptor drive, and I'm also going to set the RAM to run at its rated speed and voltage, and set the CPU to manual control. Let's boot into Windows and see if everything is correct. Booting back into Windows, you'll notice this is Windows 7. Thought it was appropriate with this graphics card being from 2009. Looks like everything is there. Q6600, 4GB of RAM, GTX 295 and some storage. I'll finish the setup and then we'll play some games. I decided to overclock the CPU to 3.33 GHz, the GPU to 666 core, 1440 shader and 1188 memory. If you want to see more on overclocking the GTX 295, I have a video on that, link is in the description. The RAM is also now running at 1110 MHz. For the games, I've chosen a range from around the same time period: Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Call of Duty World at War and Fallout 3. I'm also going to test with Skyrim and Crysis 2, which are both from 2011, just to see how well it performs. First, Modern Warfare 2. I have the game running at 1920 by 1080, with settings mostly high or extra. Getting into missions, we're getting very good FPS, well over 100 a lot of the time. It starts to dip whenever there's a lot of NPCs or smoke on screen, but it's still more than playable. Next is Call of Duty World at War. Again, the game is running at 1920 by 1080, with everything cranked as high as it can go. In the opening sequence, we're getting around 80 FPS with some dips down to 60. Let's try a different mission. This mission, there's a bit more going on, more NPCs and more action. The FPS is still pretty solid and gives a more than playable experience. Next, Fallout 3. The game is running at 1920 by 1080 with pretty much everything on high. No problems at all here. The game looks good and the card is performing very well with very consistent 50 to 60 FPS. Now, Skyrim. I started off by having the game at 1920 by 1080 on the Ultra preset, but the FPS drops when entering Riverwood, and that made me reconsider. I changed to high and got a steady 50 to 60 when walking through the town. Finally, we have Crysis 2. I have it running at 1920 by 1080 on the hardcore graphics option. I wasn't expecting it to be an amazing experience at first, but I was surprised. The opening sequence had it almost maxed out, but we had 50 to 60 FPS and it looked really good. Getting into actual gameplay, we got a pretty solid 60 FPS with some minor dips. Only downside is the GPU temps were reaching 98 to 99 degrees Celsius. I think to play this you need some extra cooling on the GPU, or even water cooling. Well, that's all there is for the GTX 295 right now. Seems like the card would have been an amazing experience at the time, even holding up in games made 2 years later, even Crysis 2. I only wish I could have owned one back in 2009. I don't remember any of those games looking that good. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this is useful to someone.